Welcome to the Peace Corner podcast. This series is brought together by GPPAC, UNOY, and CSPPS. Each episode will bring to you a different peace builder and their personal story. In this season, we dive into the topic of inclusivity. How do we meaningfully bring this concept beyond tokenism? How can we truly involve women and youth in peace building?
Young women and men still suffer from stereotypes, myths, and policy panics that harm their agency and affect realizing their full potential for peace.
The evidence is clear. Development is not sustainable if it is not fair and inclusive.
Our efforts to build and sustain peace need to be democratized to include the communities most affected. Young people are our best chance in succeeding.
In order to break the status quo and make the world a better place, we need gender equality. The fantastic phrase, women's rights are human rights, must become the spine of all our political work.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Peace Corner podcast. Today we're going to dive into the topic of social cohesion in Ukraine through peace education. And to do so, we have invited Roman Koval, who is the founder and head of the Institute for Peace and Common Ground in Ukraine. So Roman, nice to have you here.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Hi. You're joining us from Kiev today, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So great. Peace building through education, how to build peace through education. So I would like to start asking you what personally motivates you to be a peace builder.
That was actually a difficult question for me. It's, in your life, sometimes you don't really ask this question yourself. I just remembered the time when I was thinking about what shall I do in my future life, and listening to my parents in the kitchen. It was the Soviet Union. I realized that you can't really get any satisfaction from working for the state, because the results of your work do not really are not needed to anybody. And being probably 17 years old or 16, I realized that the only way to be satisfied with your own life is to work for people, not for a state. And business was out of the picture, because in the Soviet Union nobody could have his own business. Even more, it was a crime, and you could be arrested for this. So I wasn't thinking about having my own business. I was thinking that I could be either a doctor or a teacher. Being a teacher for me meant something more than just know the subject that you are teaching well enough. It seemed like you have to be a person with certain life experience so that you can actually teach young people and children not just the mathematics or chemistry, but have certain answers on how to live this life, how to resolve certain challenges or difficulties or conflicts in your life, which I didn't know how to do. So I thought that maybe being a doctor is a better choice, because if you know medicine, then you can help people. And somehow, I didn't become a doctor because of a different story. I thought that I might be a psychiatrist. And psychiatry at that time in the Soviet Union was a repressive institution, which I couldn't really reconcile with. And when I first heard about mediation, I've realized that this is a perfect area for my personal career, because this is the way to help people to resolve conflicts. And I felt that this is something that I can be helpful with. And I didn't like when basically I would observe any incidents of violence or conflicts around me. So I thought that this is very nice. And then I was given the video of a family group conferencing in New Zealand with Maori traditions. which touched me very deeply, and I realized that this is something completely non-existent in the society where I live, and I can probably do something in order to bring those traditions in our life, in our communities, and that's what the Institute for Peace and Common Ground is doing right now. That was a long answer to a question, but I couldn't answer quicker, basically.
No, I believe it was a very fascinating answer, actually, and it's really interesting to hear from you your journey to become a peace builder. And just to deepen a little bit what you said, so why exactly did you decide to focus on youth?
Well, first of all, when we started working with training mediators, pretty quickly we realized that there are lots of conflicts happening in the educational system in schools, and we know the tool that probably might be helpful. When we tried training peer mediators in 2006, we suddenly realized that they are much more perceptive to those principles and values, and they do it much better than any adults could do, for a number of reasons. One, the way we explained it to ourselves. One reason was that basically they have less of this psychological protection mechanisms that adults do. They're less cynic than adults, and they just grasp the essence of this approach, being absolutely sincere and open to those values, and just do it. And they are actually much more successful in terms of the courage that they have approaching conflict situations, in terms of the trust building, in terms of their beliefs. So yeah, it's working, and they are very active, and many of them actually now are in the peace building movement, and they are very helpful in the current moment in Ukraine.
Okay.
And what motivates is actually their successes, and when you see how people actually reconcile is not the best word. I'm looking for a better one. Well, yeah, people achieve peace in their hearts. They actually come to the agreement. This is such a positive feeling that even if you are not a party in this process, you can feel it just being around. So that's something that really drives my motivation in continue doing what I'm doing. Just to see people getting happy from being sad, that's a very grateful and very blessing experience, I would say.
Yeah, wow, I completely agree with you. It's really interesting to hear about that, and so it's really interesting to see also how this process brings young people to behave and to build peace also outside outside schools. And so related to this, as you said, also in Ukraine right now, there have been some conflicts, and also back a few years ago there have been some conflicts going on. In particular, I'm referring to the so-called Revolution of Dignity of 2014, and I would like to ask you maybe if you can contextualize a little bit what was going on during that year, and how, in your opinion, the kind of peaceful protests that started in 2013 then turned out to be more into a conflict, and basically then the revolution broke out. And also, since you work with children, since you work with young people and youth, how do you think the perception of youth involvement was in these events, and what role did they play?
Well, many people probably would agree with me that they played a major role in this whole event, because these are not just some conflicts. That was a major conflict with a capital C. And the aspirations that the whole nation had once the association with the European Union was signed. Well, it wasn't signed, but there was an agreement that we're moving in that direction. Which really encouraged and inspired lots of young people with an idea that we will live in a different country, in a European country, and freedom and dignity will be the major values that the country will live with. And these were actually the words said on the Maidan scene, from the scene, and people picked them up, and that's how the Revolution of Dignity was actually get its name. And students were the first ones actually who came to the Maidan Square to peacefully protest against the decision that the President Yanukovych has made by changing the direction of the international policy of Ukraine from European integration to going back to Russia and the kind of Soviet values, and something that really disappointed lots and lots of people. But students and young people were the ones who actually reacted the fastest, and they were protesting on Maidan. And it was a peaceful process until the government has used force against them, and then many adults actually joined the protest, and then there was the whole story of pretty violent and escalated fight, first in Kiev, mostly around Maidan. And for those who are interested in more details about the escalation of events and how the peaceful protest turned into a violent process and into a revolution, I would really recommend watching Winter on Fire. You can find this documentary on Netflix, and I think it's pretty adequate representation of the events in 2013-2014.
Okay, thank you. Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's good to have these good sources to look at and to see exactly what happens and why, what happened and why. And so given the participation of young people, of students, do you also think that following those events of 2013, 2014, following the revolution, there should be change in the education system that might, for instance, help young people to keep having these values of peace and freedom and dignity, and especially participation in decision making?
Well, I think the answer is obvious, and I would say that young people have to learn those values regardless of whether they had revolution or didn't have revolution. And I didn't mention that actually many of those young people, including those whom we trained before the revolution took place, they actually participated in the Maidan events, organizing dialogues on Maidan, organizing some volunteer support, and being negotiators and participating in even keeping the life of the Maidan protest peaceful and non-violent and non-conflict. And at the moment, Ukraine is a divided society, and yes, we live in the country which is having a war, and this is a hybrid war, and basically the country is divided by different stereotypes, different perceptions, and different groups who actually disagree with regard to the value system that the country should live with regard to the international orientation of the country. The people want to have secure life like it was during the Soviet period of time, and the people who actually believe that freedom and dignity are more important values than just comfort and secure. And it is important that we do build capacity in the society for people to be able to find common ground, be able to build bridges between citizens of the country, between neighbors in the communities. And well, it will be strange to think that this is something which is not important, because in our organization, the Institute for Peace and Common Ground, we believe that most of the problems and challenges, they could be resolved through understanding. And understanding is not something that just happens occasionally or depends on whether you are smart or not. Although, yes, it's better when you are a smart person and you can understand others well, but it's also because of the processes that we build, it's because of the choices that we make, it also because of your ability to actually consider the importance and value of the opinion of somebody else, not just yourself, and question your own beliefs and being open to alternatives, and basically following the values of peace and non-violent communication. So this is very important, and we have a number of initiatives that we believe really helps young people in Ukraine to get this capacity and build those skills.
Okay. Wow. So basically, also your institute, you're basically doing this through carrying out projects based on peace education, which is basically which basically brings all this concept of dialogue and mutual understanding, and bringing together people to actually speak and to understand each other's opinions on the same at the same table. So this is really, really, I believe personally also that it's a really, really strong and powerful tool to use peace education to do that. And so I would like to ask you if you can maybe share with us an example where through peace education a student has changed, if how basically your trainings and how this concept have made an impact of a young person, and what was the active change?
Well, there were many changes actually in the life of the people, young people with whom we worked. Some of them basically became dialogue facilitators in their own communities. Some of them actually now work in our organization because they have been trained as peer mediators back in 2008, and then as trainers. And now, for example, this young lady is the peace building advisor in our organization, who works with many schools in Ukraine, helping them to build school centers for common ground. And one of the first peer mediators whom we trained, and I remember her name was Julia, and she basically was a pretty challenging student, I would say, and teachers were probably treat her as a troublemaker activist at school, because she was always at the head of any initiative, regardless whether it was a good initiative or a bad initiative. But once we selected her as the candidate to become peer mediator at school because she had authority among her peers and she became interested in becoming the mediator, she changed all of a sudden. So she became a real change maker. So she was able to conduct about 100 mediations in her school in 2 months. And of course, she became the first candidate to become the trainer. And she became a mediation trainer. She became a circle keeper. And she was speaking in front of 300 school directors and the president of Ukraine at that time, explaining what are peacemaking circles and explaining why this important tradition, which was also a decision-making tool among Ukrainian Cossacks in Zaporizhzhia Sich, is so important to be applied in Ukrainian schools for building stronger communities in our classroom, in our schools, and in our society at large. Well, at the moment, she helped a number of other schools basically to create school centers for common ground. She was talking to her peers who were at the last 3 grades at school, just saying that I'm exactly like you. I just finished school and that's what I have been doing there. And that's how you can help your friends to resolve conflicts and become better friends and build strong relationships in your classroom and basically enjoy communication and friendship. At the moment, she works as a teacher and she teaches her students basically same skills in conflict resolution and peacemaking.
Wow, that is just amazing to hear about the story of Julia and how basically her life has changed, and now she's helping and she's an active peace builder as well, and she's carrying out these projects and working with you, and it's just amazing. So like she's one of the people who are actually actively working to create, as you said, a common ground and more stronger communities. So however, as you mentioned before, Ukraine is currently quite a divided society. So I would like to ask you, for you, what does inclusion means?
Well, inclusion means a lot of things, especially in such a country as Ukraine. People were never included in the process of making decisions which impact their lives, which are important for them, and that people will depend on. So basically, inclusion in Ukraine really starts from the pure essence of participation. So of being able basically to participate in the processes that are relevant and that are impacting your life. And in a certain way, the whole nation has been excluded from making decisions about their own lives in the former Soviet Union. Of course, there are lots of minority groups which are excluded from majority life in communities as well, and that's part of what we are doing in our projects which aim to build dialogue in communities. And the project which we say is creating infrastructure for peace in the country. We take people from the local authorities, we take people from civil society, and we build their capacity to prepare, organize, and facilitate dialogue processes in which everybody who is a relevant stakeholder to the conflict situation or the problem which is at stake could be involved, have a voice, and basically have an opportunity to contribute to the discussions and the decisions which are made at the end through consensus and mutual agreement. It's just a need, it's a right, and it's also an important value that I think every society should develop if they want to have peace inside. And I think peace builders are the ones who carry this in their hearts, and they should basically remember about it. They should remember their own experience when they felt excluded, and they have to basically develop their work in a way that there will be less groups and individuals who would feel excluded, rather than as it usually happens when things just go their own way. I do remember one of the studies which was shared by Mary Fitzstaff, the director of one of the organizations named ENCORE from Northern Islands, and they were studying 91 civil war going on the planet Earth in a certain period of time. It was in 2000s, I believe. And she said that they discovered that there is a certain number of years that it takes for a civil war to start since the very first allegations of the minority rights being neglected that take place. How long do you think it takes? I know that I wasn't supposed to be asking questions. Supposed to be asking questions to me. But okay, I can move on. And yeah, it was shocking to know that basically it was taking 18 years.
Oh, wow.
And she thought that it's probably the new generation, it takes a new generation to grow up with the feeling that they have been neglected and excluded. And this is a situation of absolute injustice that they want to change. And I think regardless of the situation that may lead to those circumstances, exclusion is never an excuse.
Yeah. Wow, that is so crazy to think that it would take so much time, that it took so much time to change that. And yes, definitely peace building can be a great tool to use to change those things. And so we talked about inclusion, and we're speaking with you who are a great peace builder. So I would like to ask you to conclude our interview. So in just a few words, how can we actually concretely change this? How can we go behind tokenism, and how can we make peace building meaningfully inclusive?
That's also a difficult question, because I was listening to some of the smart people from whom I'm really trying to learn. And I found some recommendations which were mainly appealing to the peace builders who are doing their work and who actually should be honest with themselves and being passionate enough with what they're doing, and being perceptive to the outside world. I'm trying to basically find the reference right now. Well, in particular, I'm trying to remember the speech of one of the founders of the restorative justice principles, when we asked him to speak at one of our conferences, which was devoted to introducing restorative justice in the criminal justice system of Ukraine to change the way we deal with conflicts whenever the criminal justice system calls them a crime. And I know that peace building and restorative justice are a little bit different concepts, but in our organization, we believe that restorative approach is a big part of peace building, because we help basically to restore social cohesion. We help people to restore their own perceptions. We help to restore relationships, and we help to restore the harm which is made through conflict and through violence. And so when he was talking to restorative practitioners, he said that the most important value is respect. And it means that regardless of where we find people and on the distance between right or wrong, we should respect those people, and we should probably this is one of the values that may help peace builder to become truly inclusive. If we really able to feel this respect inside our hearts to the people that we work with.
Wow. Yes. Thank you.
Another value is modesty, and another value is basically, well, probably curiosity was the word that he was, but it's basically about being open to something different that you believe in.
Okay, so yeah, those are definitely some values that some people might have naturally, but most of the people should probably learn to have, because sometimes it's really, really difficult to being open-minded and to be able to listen to someone else's opinion, and yeah, probably there must be also a certain amount of curiosity and understanding, and definitely that cannot be exist if there's no respect at the base of that. So thank you so much for having shared with us your thoughts about this. Our interview is now concluded, but I really would like to thank you for having shared your experience, your great work, what your organization also is doing in Ukraine. And it's really, I believe it's always so inspiring to hear people who work in the field of peace education and peace building and restorative justice, and basically people who work in conflict situation or post-conflict situation, because there is still a lot to do in the world, and we really need people like you and the people that who are working with you to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Federica, and I hope that maybe my story may inspire somebody else to join the peace building forces.
I'm sure it will.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Peace Corner. Interested in hearing more from us? Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you might be listening.